as we like to say, good to be seen by you if you're watching us on the live stream, and if you're listening on the podcast, great to have you along as well. I'm sitting here in Minneapolis. It's a beautiful spring day. Spring is in the air. We'd love to know what you're doing, where you're doing it from. So if you're watching on the live stream, let us know in the comments. Tell us who you are, where you're from, what you're doing today. And look, if you listen on the podcast, shoot us an email, old school style, to podcast@votecommon.good.com. Tell us where you do your Vote Common Good daily podcast listening from. We'd love to know. We love to take this positive, open-eyed, and honest look at the question, where are we in this world? What's going on? And what can we do about it? And we're at a place where we can really address the death penalty in the United States in the next 55 days. So today we're going to be talking about the realistic possibility of ending the federal death penalty in the next 2 months here in the United States. We're joined by Abe Bonowitz. Abe works with an effort that I am also a part of and so proud of called Death Penalty Action. And Abe, so good to have you on the podcast today. There's some good news in the air, my friend. Tell us all about it.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's just amazing what keeps happening each day. We have just more and more people are coming on board. Yesterday, Senator Durbin introduced his bill with 18 co-sponsors. This is the Death Penalty Prohibition Act of 2021. It's I'm not sure if we have a bill number yet in the Senate, but in the House it's HR 262, and basically calls for ending the federal and military death penalty. And President Biden has said he'll sign such a bill if we can get it to him. I think he sent a clear signal to everyone through his campaign promises, and also, more importantly, through the comments of Merrick Garland last week when he testified in his confirmation hearing that he believes the policy of the administration will be that no more federal executions. So Joe Biden is doing his part, and really it's on all of us to urge our members of Congress to sign on to the Federal Death Penalty Prohibition Act of 2021, Senator Durbin's bill, Ayanna Pressley's bill. I want to give a shout out to Representative Adriano Espaillat also. He's got a bill that's very similar to Pressley's bill. We believe it'll all come together into one bill, and we all just need to get behind it and make sure our elected officials in Congress know we want them to support ending the death penalty.
So this is a really big deal. And a lot of people, look, you and I have done a lot of work on the death penalty. We've traveled around the country. We've been arrested together. We've done protests together. We've tried to raise awareness around the death penalty. One of the things that I'm keenly tuned into is that, boy, people don't like talking about the death penalty, right? It's sort of the saddest part for them on so many areas, right? They feel really...
I'm always worried about telling people what I do at parties. It just goes down that rabbit hole. So,
Because, look, the death penalty is related to so many difficult issues, right? Normally someone's been murdered, or there's been a number of people that have been murdered. So that's what brings the death penalty into action. The government's looking to then use death to serve out punishment. It just is something that human beings want to recoil from. And that's been part of the problem. That's what has left us so often with this idea that people don't want to talk about it, that people want to avoid. And Abe, if you could turn that volume down a little bit more, I think that echo is still happening.
Sure, there we go.
Thanks. And you've been tireless, literally some days, overnight doing this work. So can you just set the stage for people, and we'll talk about the bill in a minute, but just, even though I know, especially on a Thursday morning, Debbie on Facebook is, at work in Florida, and people might not want to, always talk about the death penalty, but let's give a little context for how it works. States have their own death penalty laws. The federal government has death penalty laws, and this one is particularly around federal death penalty. Can you just sort of describe the landscape overall of the death penalty in the United States and why what's happening right now with the Biden administration?
We could talk for a long time about this, but the nutshell is that the death penalty is on its way out. Since 2007, we've abolished the death penalty in New Jersey, New Mexico, Illinois, Connecticut, Maryland, even passed a bill in Nebraska, although that one was overturned by a referendum from Governor Ricketts. but then on to New Hampshire, Colorado about a year ago. Remember when we went through Colorado?
I was going to say that was
On the bus tour?
just over a year ago. It was in January. Yeah.
That's right. And then just last month in Virginia, the House of Delegates and the Senate passed the bill. They've reconciled it between them. It's waiting for the governor to have his signing, his bill signing days, and we anticipate that will be in April. And when Governor Northam signs that bill in Virginia, Virginia will become the 23rd state to have abandoned the death penalty. I say abandoned because there are 12 states that never had it. In addition to the states I mentioned that have legislatively repealed the death penalty, the courts have thrown it out in New York, Delaware, and Washington state. That leaves us with 23 states, as soon as Virginia's bill is signed, that don't have a death penalty. And then the vast majority of other states that don't use it. It's a handful of states. Texas, really, and then there's other states that want to use it, but they have to figure out their method of execution. That's been the holdup. So actually, right now in South Carolina, for example, in fact, I was just on email chatting with Gary, that was the guy running for governor last year when we were in South Carolina. He was. We were talking, and the Senate just passed a bill in South Carolina to add both the electric chair and the firing squad as execution options, because lethal injection, the pharmaceutical companies don't want people using their legitimately therapeutic drugs to kill people. So
it really tells you something, and this was big news a few years ago when the pharmaceutical industry said, we won't give you our drugs any longer if you're going to use them to kill people. And exactly. For some people, the shock that even the pharmaceutical industry has more ethics around the use of chemicals to not kill people than the state governments that want to use them is a significant
astounding
statement.
Yeah. So that's what's, now states are figuring out, okay, we have to shift. In some states, like in Ohio, former attorney general who did lots of executions, Mike DeWine, now the governor, is saying, we can't use these pharmaceuticals because they'll cut us off, and we need it for all the other things that we do besides kill people. So, and then he said also, but we're not going to change our practice. And that's why Ohio this week, as well as Georgia, as well as Wyoming, have bills to abolish the death penalty. That's the landscape. Meanwhile, some states are trying to figure out what has really slowed down executions in the past year has been COVID, right? For various reasons. Although Alabama tried to have an execution last month, and they said we figured out our protocol so we can all be safe from COVID, but there were 2 stays pending, and your audience, especially this audience, should enjoy this maybe, or scoff at it, or who knows what. But there were 2 stays pending. One was whether Willie Smith's intellectual disability was enough to keep him from being executed. And there's a prohibition on executing people with a low IQ, except they didn't set what that low IQ should be. So that was one of the arguments before the Supreme Court that we were all still waiting for a decision on at 11 p.m. when he was supposed to be killed at 6 p.m. The other one was, is it constitutional for him to be executed without having his clergy person in the death room with him? And they said, fine to kill him, even though he's got a developmental disability, but we can't kill him if his pastor isn't in the room. And just to back up, this came about because in Alabama, there was a guy that they had a Christian minister, part of the prison department, the Department of Corrections, that had been with people in the death chamber. But as soon as somebody wanted to have their Muslim cleric, they said, oh no, we can't do it. And they actually wrote a new protocol that said the cleric can't be in the room. And that's what was the challenge, right? So now the Supreme Court said you can't kill him unless this is, the new justice and Kavanaugh, they were with the majority on this, saying we can't kill him except we can't kill him without religion. So now what's Alabama done? They've actually gone and rewritten their execution protocol because 1106 we got that order. Okay, stay is upheld on that, and I figured, okay, well they'll just have his pastor go in there with him and not kill him, but instead they sent him back to his cell after holding him right outside the execution chamber for hours. So he got to go back because they had to rewrite their protocol. If they had executed him against what was in their protocol, then somebody would have complained, right? So we're just waiting. Any day now, they're going to give him a new execution date so they can kill him with his pastor in the room.
And this is one of the most difficult parts of understanding all this. And like, there are people who are rightly and should be saying, we execute innocent people in this country, and that's of course wrong. So a lot of people are opposed to the death penalty because people who are not guilty are being executed. But then there's people who are against the death penalty because they don't like the way it's handled. Right.
Yes. And also there's the question of culpability. Did Willie Smith do what he did, what he's accused of? Yeah. But does his capacity to understand and to reason rise to the level? Anyway, I didn't even finish answering your question. That was so the point is that the lay of the land is the death penalty is on its way out. We're at our lowest level of not just executions, but new death sentences and capital indictments in more than 20 years, consistently each year. And that's notwithstanding COVID. And by the way, we also are now at the longest period of time between a state execution in 40 years. Okay, since there was a time this long between state executions. Then you shift over to the federal execution situation. That's what we've been working on since we were arrested together in 2017. As we were released from being held overnight in jail, they sent us, we got to go home, but behind us, Donald Trump was being inaugurated. And that's when we realized it's only a matter of time before federal executions happen, and we needed something, and that's why we created Death Penalty Action, because there was no other entity in the country that was really geared to providing action tools and opportunities to do something about it to your everyday public. And that's what we're doing at Death Penalty Action.
And it's such good work. And I'll just lay the landscape here why I think that matters. We have this very complex system of government in our country. You have your state governments and then municipal governments, city governments, but then you have the federal government. And both at the state level and the federal level, there's the ability to execute people. Some states have it in their law that it's available. Some places don't. But that's state law. So lots of death penalty action work to stop death penalty has been going on at the state level. Then there's the federal executions. Now, these are ones that some people hear about. And when people hear about an execution, what I've come to learn, they don't know the difference between if it's Florida that's executing someone or if someone's executed in Indiana, knowing that that's a federal execution. But there's these different systems of prison and different systems of executions. So what's at the precipice right now that people really can act on? If you don't live in one of those states, like if you don't live in Alabama or you don't live in Florida, a lot of people like me have thought, because I live in Minnesota, we don't have the death penalty, I'm off the hook. Here's why you're not off the hook, and it's a good reason that you want to be on the hook. There is a federal law that is about to be put to a vote that will make federal death penalty illegal, and at the military level. That's what Abe's been describing. So sometimes I know people that live in states that don't have the death penalty, they blank it out, right? They step away from it because they think to themselves, we don't do it in our state. I don't live there. It has nothing to do with my governor. If it did, I would say something. But we execute people at the federal level. And Abe, you can remind me the number. Is it 15 people that the Trump administration executed between 13 between July and January of this last year, the last 8 months, the Trump administration executed 13 people. We stood outside the building where they were doing these executions, for the final few. So it is on all of us is the point that I want to make. I don't want people who don't live in death penalty states to think this is some other state's problem. There's a federal death penalty that goes on in this country. And if a president simply says, I won't move forward with executions, or if an attorney general says we won't move forward with executions, that doesn't solve the problem. That just stays the problem. That just sets it aside, because you get another president like Trump who wants to go on a mass murder execution rampage, which he did, and 13 people are executed in a matter of months. That can happen under future administration. So we have to solve this federal problem right now, which is the work that Death Penalty Action does in particular, separate from all those other states. Is that about right? Is that about?
Yes. But and I want to say, people that live in states that have the death penalty often don't realize that they live in states that have the death penalty. Even when there's executions happening, high profile. I was outside the prison when Carla Faye Tucker was executed in Texas, like 20 years ago, whenever that was. George W. Bush was still the governor of Texas. I was outside the prison when that happened, and the very next day there was a cop was killed in the line of duty. And you would think that everybody and their brother would know, because of the way that was being handled. She was a woman. It was, people like Pat Robertson were saying, don't kill her. And still they did. So you had to be living under a rock to not know that was happening. So there was no deterrent effect there, really. But and people just aren't aware. They're not aware. And also people came to learn recently that Indiana, separate from the federal death penalty, the federal prison, which happens to be in Indiana, in Terre Haute, Indiana has its own death penalty, and that death row prison is in Michigan City, Indiana. So they have two of it, which some people were upset to understand. Wait, there's two death houses in Indiana, but Indiana hasn't had an execution in a long time. More than half of the death penalty states have not had an execution in a very long time. Most are not going to. So that's our situation. And more to what Doug was saying, I think that Donald Trump has this fascination with the death penalty. You might remember the case of the Central Park Five. If you saw the movie When They See Us, that's about the case of the Central Park Five. And here Donald Trump, so there was, if you don't know, that there was a person was found raped and brutally beaten in Central Park in New York, and a bunch of kids were out at the same time. 5 of them were put through the ringer and basically tortured and convinced to testify against other people that they didn't even know. And New York didn't have a death penalty at that time, so they all got sentenced to prison terms. But Donald Trump put out a full-page ad in the New York Times, paid for it himself, calling for bring back the death penalty. So he's had this fascination with it. And what was remarkable about this period of executions, and it's key to understand, the Attorney General is the one who sets the dates. The president has the power of clemency. But the president sends a signal to his or her, if it ever gets to be, Attorney General as to what their policy is going to be, which is why we're excited that Merrick Garland actually referenced we're not going to have executions under the Biden administration. But it was clear that Trump did. And initially, I believe this is still true, I was arguing that these executions that the Trump administration is doing is all about setting him up for a moment in the debate when he will be able to say to the Democrat, you Democrats are weak. I'm tough. I'll execute people. Why won't you kill these terrible murderers? The first one they killed was a person in the murder. There was a child murdered, and he was had a history of white supremacy. So, the president said one short thing about it in a press conference around that time. And the day after that execution on July 15th, there was an email that went out to the campaign saying exactly that. Donald Trump has just killed this terrible murderer. He's great. And Joe Biden needs to say why he wouldn't execute these people. And that's the last we heard. I mean, even during the Republican National Convention this year, there were 2 executions, including one of a Native American, the only Native American on death row, where the Navajo Nation had said, we don't want this guy. The victim families had said, we don't want this guy to be killed. The U.S. attorney who prosecuted the case didn't want to seek the death penalty, but then Attorney General Ashcroft overrode him, and they found a loophole through which, because you're not supposed to be seeking death sentences in cases that are other nations' sovereign territory, which in that way, the Navajo Nation and other Native American tribes are sovereign, right? They're supposed to be. So even they had, the Navajo Nation president and vice president, the vice president spoke at the Republican National Convention, but there was not a word about it. Not a word about it. You would think, hey, we got 2 executions this week, everybody, rah, rah, rah.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was never mentioned. But
why do you think that was?
To the end of Donald Trump's term, he never said anything about the death penalty again, as far as I know. If anybody can show me,
and why is that? Why? I mean, I thought you were right all along that Donald Trump was going to do this. What do you think's going on?
My personal belief is that he just has this fascination with the power to be able to kill, just like he's fascinated by dictators and he wanted to hold dictatorial types of power and wield them. And we've seen that over and over again. That's one of them. His jealousy that, the guy in charge in North Korea can execute people with mortar shells or seeking packs of dogs on him, if we believe all these stories that come out of North Korea. But Donald Trump couldn't, I just think he had the secret fetish with the idea that he's overseeing executions. Now, that's just me. Nobody else is going to say something like that. But I'm trying, in my mind, I'm sitting here trying to figure out, why are we doing this? Why would he not take the opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to grant mercy to the severely mentally ill woman who did this horrible crime but can't be culpable because look how sick she is. And look what happened to her in her childhood that got her to the place to do what she did. I can't kill these people who are developmentally disabled, where we have this track record of racism. The last person executed the night that we were there, and we put actually crime scene tape. Here it is. This is the crime scene tape that we used from our action. We actually shut down the entrance to the prison for a couple of minutes, forcing a delay in that execution, by the way. But that guy that they were trying to kill,
we did what we
Dustin
could for a few minutes.
Yes. Well, it was enough to delay it, and it was delayed because it meant that the prison vehicles taking the media witnesses who are required to be there by law was delayed and had to find a different way around to get back to the death house. But Dustin Higgs was executed. His date was on January 15th. He ended up not being killed until about 1:30 in the morning on the 16th. But they gave this guy, this black man who had never killed anybody, an execution date on Martin Luther King's birthday. And I mean, even Martin Luther King, is it the third, wrote an op-ed saying, this is just a slap in the face to Black people and to the memory of Dr. King. So
Abe, here's my take on Trump. Here's what I think happened, and
go ahead.
I don't really know, but this is my suspicion. They field tested the issue of the death penalty, even with their own voters. And I think public sentiment has moved against the death penalty to such a degree that trying to use it as a campaign argument was going to backfire. I think the people who are supportive of the law and order sort of narrative, but I think the work you have done, a lot of other groups have done over decades, that we're in a place in this country where the sentiment against the death penalty has tipped. And so anybody who's all for the death penalty, you've got those people anyway. But people who are not for the death penalty and still want to vote for Republicans, I think they're being even in the places before COVID, when executions were happening, governors were talking about it in a way that wasn't the way it was in the early 2000s and in the late 1990s. So I think what's gone on, and I think this is why we put the pedal to the metal. I think you're right that Trump absolutely wanted to have executions under his presidency. They then were field testing the effect of that, and they wanted to downplay it, so they kept it quiet. And this is where it's horrendous to me. Well, they kept him from
saying anything,
They did, and they kept the spotlight off of it. And look, like you and I stood out there on these death penalty actions that were happening in January, and so many people on our Facebook feeds and friends even said to us, I didn't know this was going on. I had no idea this was happening. So we know that the public doesn't want it. Like, I see at least 4 reasons people are against the death penalty. One is they don't want innocent people executed, and that happens. The second, which you've raised, is culpability, like someone was in a position of either mental state that they shouldn't be held accountable, or age, or some other reason. The third is that it's cruel.
But not to that level.
Not to that level. That it's cruel, right? This is the procedural argument, like the shotgun or firing squads or chemicals or whatever is cruel and inhumane. So some people don't like it for that reason. Then there's a fourth reason. I'm in this camp. It's just immoral and wrong to execute people as a punishment. Like, the government shouldn't be killing anyone. Whatever reason you would pick of those four, right? Innocence, culpability, cruelty, or just immorality. Whatever one of those four someone's in on, we want you to reach out to your congressperson, because if we can end the death penalty at the federal level, that sends and make it illegal, not just not perform an execution, but to remove it as a legal option in the United States.
Tear down the death house. That's what we want to.
And that's a great idea you've come up with, to stop, tear down the death penalty and tear down the death house in Terre Haute, Indiana, where they do. And so for people who don't know, they do executions, almost all of them, federal executions, in one facility in Indiana, in the town of Terre Haute.
All the federal ones.
All of them happen there.
At the death house in Terre Haute. Although that was one of the policies that they changed. The Trump administration changed it to make it so they could use any facility if they wanted to.
That's right, because they were afraid that Indiana,
back up on that. There's one more reason I want to make sure to talk about, and this is the reason I actually changed my mind on the death penalty, and it dovetails into the morality piece, but really it's the fairness piece. So, anybody that's ever been to the U.S. Supreme Court and has looked up, you might have noticed carved into the face of the U.S. Supreme Court building are the words "equal justice under law." And anybody that's ever encountered our criminal legal system in this country knows that we don't have equal justice under law. What matters more is everything from the geography and the county lines of where the crime might be committed to how much money you have. And the reason geography matters, one of the reasons is you have an elected official that is willing to seek a death sentence or not. And now they also have to have the budget to do it. If you kill in a rural county where there's not a large tax base, they don't have the budget for it, and they can't even seek a death sentence if they wanted to without getting special funding. And to me, that's the thing that changed my mind, was learning this county disparity. You have to kill in a county that can afford it, even if it's for it to be possible. And that's not fair. And that's what I said, is we've got to kill them all. And if we are going to kill a limited amount, we can't be picking how we do so by race and money and politics and geography. So to me, it was that unfairness that made me jump from one side of the fence to the other. And of course, circled into that is going to be the question of morality. And if you're a person of faith, I happen to be Jewish, so I look at what the Hebrew scriptures say. One of my favorite things to cite is Leviticus 19, which is basically, don't give deference to the wealthy. Okay, and if you're going to not give deference to the wealthy, then you can't execute people, because we only execute poor people, even though rich people kill people too, right? So that's our bottom line. So the opportunity now is, what do we do about it? And if you live in a state where there is a death penalty, build a relationship with and talk to your elected officials at the state level. And because you live in the United States, we get to all talk to our members of Congress no matter what state we live in. And we've made it easy to do so at deathpenaltyaction.org. Just go to the front page. I don't know if we're able to show it, if we have a couple minutes to show the video that Zach just made for us.
I would love to show it, but I don't have access. I don't have it right here at hand. So we'll have to, we'll share it in the stream.
And that's what you can just go to deathpenaltyaction.org and just scroll down like half a page. It's the first thing there once you get past the big pictures. And there's two things. There's a thing to link on to our Abolitionist Toolkit, where you can go and you can find all kinds of things to do. That's in the text, but there's also a big box that shows click here to write a letter to your members of Congress. And right next to that is the new video that sort of spells out some of this in 2 minutes, narrated by Representative Ayanna Pressley, who's the bill sponsor in the House. And there's lots of other actions you can do. We've got 3 executions currently scheduled in Texas. There's petitions on those. You're going to be hearing about this case of Melissa Ruscio, who just got put back on death row. She's innocent, and we're going to be doing a film screening and launching a petition about that just as soon as that's all ready, so maybe even today. So there's so many things to do, but if you do nothing else, send that one note to your member of Congress, each of them, your 2 senators and your House member, and say, and it's simple, I oppose the death penalty. And we've written it for you on the online action.
You're helping people out.
When you do that, you'll get an email back that says, here's how you get the contact. It's a link to click on to get the contact information for your members of Congress. And then we're asking people to triple their impact by making a phone call and writing a handwritten note or a typewritten note and putting it in the actual postal mail. because that is the gold standard. When you talk about moving members of Congress or legislators, they might get a tally, how many people called, how many people emailed. If it's a postcard campaign, they'll count up how many of the postcards. But in some senators' offices, in some House members' offices, and many, I would imagine, they get handed, here's the stuff that actually came in the mail. And
so send that letter.
People to do.
All right, so here's the here's the actual House resolution. It's House Resolution number 262. I've got it up on the screen here for people that are watching on the live stream. So if you're watching on the podcast, you can look this up here. Go over to votecommon.good.com and you can see this House Resolution 262. Now, Abe, so for people who don't remember their Schoolhouse Rock episodes from when they were a kid about how a bill becomes a law. People in the House of Representatives are part of a bill. It has to be engaged by the Senate. They need to reconcile this into a shared bill that both those parts of our government will sign. And then the third part is that the president needs to sign off on it. Now, we're all confident that the president of the United States, that Joe Biden is going to sign off on this bill if it's passed. So the pressure point here is not just to pressure the vice president or the president. The point is to pressure Congress to get this bill in front of the president. And here's what shocked me about this bill. And I have it up here on the screen. Here's page 1. Here's page 2. And that's all there is to it. I have looked at a few bills from Congress. They're normally quite hardy. They're normally quite sophisticated and full. Long. This one, on the other hand, its brevity is beautiful. I'm just literally going to read it because it's so short. Is that okay? Here's what it says. Please. A bill to prohibit the imposition of the death penalty for any violation of federal law and for other purposes. That's the header. And then it now has only, and this is the shortest I've ever seen, 14 lines. And one of those lines is one word long. So if people are just listening on the podcast and can't see this, the way that a bill is laid out is like Bible passages where every sentence, every line has a number next to it. So after the introduction, which I just read, that it's a prohibition of the death penalty for the violation of federal law, it says this. Be enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled. This act may be cited as the Federal Death Penalty Prohibition Act. Line 6. In general, notwithstanding any other provision of law, no person may be sentenced to death or put to death on or after the date of enactment of this act for any violation of federal law. That's pretty much it. And then it goes on with 4 more sentences and says, person sentenced before the date of enactment, notwithstanding any provision of law, any person sentenced to death before the date of enactment of this act for any violation of federal law shall be resentenced. I mean, it's the shortest bill I've ever seen. The majority of the words in the bill are notwithstanding any other provision of law. It just says a person who's sentenced to death may not be sentenced to death in the United States, and anyone who was must be resentenced. End of story. There's something great about this in my mind that's the law that's in front of them. Ayanna Pressley is the author of it. A bunch of people have co-signed it. This is on. I've written in the introduction to this conversation. In the next 55 days, the federal death penalty can end in this country because I think Joe Biden wants this to happen in his first 100 days. I think Congress wants to move it forward. There's now this House bill. As you said, Durbin is now moving forward a Senate bill. They're going to put those together. If you can, especially those of you that live in states with a Republican senator or Republican congressperson, if you can lean into them and tell them you don't even have to argue with them about the 5 reasons that we've articulated here to be against the death penalty. Do it if you want. Just say to them, support this bill, right? Support this bill. Vote for it and move it forward. And once you say to a congressperson or you say to a senator, support this bill, you're now having a different conversation. Now you're saying to them, not, I need you to listen to me, I need you to care about my issues. You're saying, I need you to do your job. Pass this bill. And that's Amen. Why we say that in the next 55 days, you can do something, all of us, because every one of us has senators, 2 of them. Every one of us has congresspeople. You've all got one. You have 3 people in your life that promise to listen to you that can stop the federal death penalty in this country. And it's never been this close. There have been times where the Supreme Court has said this, that the death penalty is unconstitutional. There have been times when states have set aside using their death penalty. But right now is the time when this can happen in the next 2 months, when the death penalty at the federal level can be prohibited by law. Now, Abe, I might be wrong about this. You're the expert on this. Has there ever been a time in American history where the federal government has prohibited the use of executing its own citizens by law? That is made a law to prohibit the death penalty.
And I'm not a historian, nor am I a lawyer, but I do know that the Constitution of the United States does allow executions. But it prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. And that's actually before Trump had his way with the U.S. Supreme Court and changed it up. Our movement strategy was to take a case to the U.S. Supreme Court to challenge the death penalty based on the Eighth Amendment prohibition of cruel and unusual punishment, not the cruel part, because they've clearly decided it's not cruel enough, but the unusual part is the argument that you can't lose, because really you have to look at a map of the United States, not by state, but by county, to see how unusual it is. In 2012, I think it was, we looked at this and saw there were 16 counties between 2010 and 2015. So I guess it was 2016 that we looked at this. Between 2010 and 2015, there were 16 counties that had more than 1 or 2 executions come out of those counties. 16. And by the way, in one of the silver linings of the 2016 election was that 5 prosecutors were unseated in 5 of those counties, right? We replaced them. The voters replaced them with prosecutors that were going to be less likely to seek a death sentence. So that's a big part of it. And we continued that trend of prosecutors being changed out. We just did it. And you might remember when Vote Common Good Tour was in Columbus, Ohio. We had Gary Tyack come and share his experience as why he was running. And he rooted it in his opposition to the death penalty against this high-using guy who wanted to execute in Franklin County. And Gary Tyack unseated him. And so no more death trials being, wasting our tax dollars in Franklin County, Ohio. But anyway, point is, the death penalty is in disuse. It's very infrequently needed, and most urgently. And for anybody that's still, but these people did this terrible thing, guess what? We can be safe from dangerous offenders and hold them accountable without executions. Yes. And that's what we do in more than 99% of the cases. And when you look at the fewer than 1% where they actually end up with an execution or even just a death sentence, most of the time, they're not the worst of the worst. They're the people that didn't have good lawyers. They're the people who are black people who killed white people. They're the people that, circumstances were what they were, but they're not the worst killers. They're the people who can get away with killing. And that's where the unfairness is. And that's why we can say, we don't need executions to be safe from dangerous offenders.
That's great. So Melissa on Facebook is saying, oh, dang, I missed the 5 reasons. Hey, we've now added 6. So let me at least give you 6 great reasons. One is it doesn't work. People are talking about this all the time, right? It's not a deterrent.
It's a failed public policy.
In 9th grade, when I was in a debate class and I had to debate supporting the death penalty as a kid, the big thing was like it's a deterrent. And to your point, we can see over and over, it's not a deterrent. People don't not murder because they're going to be murdered. That so many reasons. So that's number one. It doesn't work as a deterrent. Secondly, it's unfair, and this fairness issue is a big deal, that only some people are executed, and those who are often are the most vulnerable in our society. So it's extremely unfair and doesn't fit the American sensibility. Number 3, and I wish I had these numbered on a sheet for you, but number 3 is innocent people are being executed. More than 10% of the people who have been executed in this country, 10% of the number that have been executed have been exonerated. So we know that innocent people are on death row because they're being exonerated. In fact, Abe and I are friends with some of these people. We know people who've been on death row who then were later found to be innocent. Like not only just like, oh, we shouldn't execute you for what you did, innocent, not that, but they didn't do the crime.
They
Had
didn't do
nothing
it.
to do
That
with
number, they just did a review of like 9,600 cases where the death penalty was sought and a death penalty was won. Most of them have been overturned. It's now 185 are officially exonerated. 185 people we've sent to be killed who turned out to be innocent. And we don't even know how many we've actually killed.
Incredible. So it doesn't work. It's unfair. Innocent people are being executed. Number 4, there's a culpability issue with so many people are executed, meaning do they have the mental state that they should be held accountable in this kind of way? That is so common in these death penalty cases. Number 5, some people call it procedurally cruel. It's cruel and inhumane. The Supreme Court seems to obsess about this particular one because the Constitution has this cruel and inhumane moment. So that's been a big arguing point. And then the 6th is it's immoral. Now, as Melissa says so well, she has 5,984,000 reasons why she would be against the death penalty. So many people do. But if you're in a conversation with people who want to still say we need it for some other reason, feel free to share these. I will say, and Abe, this is the most heartbreaking part of the death penalty conversation for me. Most people that I know that support the death penalty use the Bible as their reference point for their rationalization. It is so heartbreaking that this is what they're doing. So anybody who's in the religious communities, Jewish, Muslim, Christian especially, the text that you can use will call you to not execute people. I promise. If someone's using an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth or some of this kind of argument, and they want to bring up the Bible, I don't know if Death Penalty Action has materials that can help with that, but there's a lot of them out in the world that can help you talk to people who want to use ancient scriptures and religious teaching documents to justify their view of the death penalty. They're just wrong about it, and it would be really helpful to move people along from it.
We could go a long way, but I want to just quote Bill Pelkey, a friend who his grandmother was murdered, and he initially supported the death penalty for the girl that did that from a biblical perspective. But he had a shift, and he would say, Jesus talked about forgiveness, and Jesus was asked about the death penalty, and he said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." But was it Paul that said to Jesus, "How many times were we supposed to forgive? 7 or 70?"
Peter. It was Peter, but yeah.
This is my favorite line from Bill.
And maybe
Pelkey.
Paul and Mary, maybe all of them.
Jesus said 70 times 7. And then Bill would say, but that doesn't mean that on the 491st time we stop forgiving. It means that forgiveness is supposed to be a way of life. And that was the teaching. So, there's so many ways. And yes, it's funny that you mentioned what resources do we have. deathpenaltyaction.org. You click on the federal resources page, or there's a link right there. And then you get to the the Federal Abolitionist Toolkit, which is down that page on our federal death penalty page. And within that, it's about to be up in the next day or so, is a whole resource set for people of faith in their church, in their communities of faith, pulpit announcements, bulletin announcements, samples that you can just cut and paste and adjust, also sample sermons and things like that we're coming up with. And anybody that's actually got one, if you've given a sermon, if you've gotten it down, we're collecting them to put into this collection. You can just email it to info@deathpenaltyaction.org, and we'll include it. And if you've got a particular insight or an interpretation of a piece of scripture, send it to us, info@deathpenaltyaction.org, and we'll use it and share it with people.
So, Abe, it's such an important moment. And I know that, on moral issues like this, some people feel like they've just lived with the death penalty as a moral issue in our society for all of our adult lives. Of course, it comes up. It can feel like we're just caught in the same cycle. Nothing's going to change. That's not the case right now, unlike all the other moments. When we were in Indiana together, and I remember telling you this story, that I went into the little superette, that our little grocery store that was right in the parking lot that we were using. Yeah, the Dollar General, which I thought was a dollar store. Turns out the Dollar General is not a dollar store. But so I was rather confused about the pricing. And I was standing in line, and the woman in front of me who was checking out, saying to the person working the cash register, said, oh, this group is out there. There must be another execution happening tonight. So here she lives in Terre Haute, Indiana, where they do federal executions. The reason she thought that there was an execution happening is because our groups were out there. And I remember the woman looking at the cashier and saying, you know, it's just so hard. It's such a hard, complicated thing. On the one hand, and then on the other hand, I don't know, like she was really torn, this poor woman. And then she kind of shrugged her shoulders. The person at the cash register was kind of tired of talking about it because we'd been there for days, and she just looked at her blankly.
They were great. Those people.
And then the woman turned and goes, hey, they have peppermint Reese's Pieces now. Like she lived in this moment where she was just caught up in the moral dilemma and then thought, well, what's a person to do? And then saw the Reese's Pieces with a peppermint flavoring and moved. And that's where so many people, they just feel totally powerless. But right now, in this brief moment we have of our period of why it's mattered about who our president is that House Resolution 262 is going to become a bill that can be signed by senators and can be signed by representatives in the House of Representatives and can be signed by the president. And all of that can happen in the next 50 days. It's incredible that we're living at this moment. So if you feel like, what can you ever do? Laws never seem to change. These are big, complicated issues that people have literally been fighting about for, the recorded 5,000 years of human history. We know people have been arguing about this because it's in every religion, every culture's conversation about what do we do about executions. Like every part of human society has dealt with this. The United States is at a moment where it can make a declaration about how this country is going to treat it. And if you think this isn't going to meet pushback, there is a strong pro-death penalty movement in this country. People are on our live stream right now saying things about how they're so for the death penalty. So this isn't a gimme. Just because Joe Biden's the president, just because the Senate is a 50-50 split with Vice President Harris being able to make the
there are Democrats who are not
deciding
going
vote.
to get.
There are Democrats who are not going to get. So look, this
That's why
is the moment.
My sister is a dyed-in-the-wool, red-hatted. She had her Make America Great hat like when there
She was
still
early.
11 other candidates in the Republican pool. I like to call it that clown card, but but she opposes the death penalty, and not just because she's my sister, but because she's thought about it and she's a fiscal conservative. Okay, another person, Ron Mcandrew. He's a crazy Trumper, but he's also the former warden of Florida State Prison. He carried out that state's last 3 executions in the electric chair, and he is as pro-Trump as he can be. And that's the one thing he disagreed with Trump about was his use of the death penalty, and because he's the person that actually carried it out. And he talks about the men he executed visiting him in his dreams. Okay, that's the burden that people don't think about. You talk about PTSD for soldiers who go and kill, for our freedom and all that. Well, there's also prison workers who kill as part of their job, and the burden we ask them to take on is a burden that no person should have to take on as part of their job.
Yeah, to be an executioner. And when we were in Terre Haute, Indiana, again, where these federal executions happen, I learned that in that prison, they bring in executioners from other states, people who don't work in that prison, to complete the execution and kill the person, because they know that the people who've lived with these people for all these years in and around their lives, they're not going to do it, or they're not going to want to do it, or it's going to be so traumatizing. So all of this,
I don't want my workers to have to take on this burden.
I mean, we can and should go on for the next 55 days reminding people that the death penalty is hazard. It doesn't work. It's immoral. All of the reasons, and this is the time to really lean in. Look, every Congress can pass laws, and if for some reason something goes wrong, somebody else should pass another law. But Congress people and presidents will tell you over and over, we don't have all the power. We follow the people. This is not a Republican-Democrat issue, as Abe has brought up. There are Democrats who are for the death penalty as representatives. There are Republicans who are opposed to it. There are Republican voters who want it to end, and there are Democratic voters who don't know what they think about it. So if there's ever been an issue that you want to engage with the people in your social networks, in your family, that isn't just, are you for Republicans? Are you for Trump or not? Or are you for the insurrectionists? Or are you for democracy? Right? If you don't want to have that argument, but you want to talk about something else meaningful, you will be surprised when you say to people, we need to call our representatives and get them to support this bill and stop the death penalty. Who will say amen and who will say, oh, no, we don't? So feel free to use this one to learn something about the people in your life. And it won't just be political. It's not going to... Generally speaking, it's going to break along political lines, but you will be shocked. And if you've got Democrat voting friends who are for the death penalty, they need a little help on this one. If you have Republicans who are against the death penalty, they need a little support on this one.
And we have the tools for you. Again, at deathpenaltyaction.org, get to the federal death penalty page, and that's where you'll find a whole toolkit of, number one, is things you can do. And below that toolkit, there's talking points. There's, we're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And
are you doing a TikTok dance, Abe? Is there an Abe Bonowitz TikTok dance that we are missing out on?
They haven't gotten me to create that yet. Allison may be watching, and she's been on me to do that. But
Abe, I have been around you enough to know that you could put together an epic TikTok dance. I am with those calling you to create a TikTok dance.
Well, I'll tell you what, if we can get enough people to toss in some money today to help us do this work, if we get to $1,000 maybe, I'll do a TikTok. So
hey, we raised $1,000 over there at Death Penalty Action. You'll get a TikTok dance out of Abe Bonowitz,
and that will. deathpenaltyaction.org and click on the donate tab. If we can get to $1,000 today, I'll have a TikTok up tomorrow.
Yeah, I think I know some people might write that check themselves just to make that dance
bring
happen.
Bring it, because that's the other thing that you can do. Checkbook activism is very real and very needed. I've got 9 people working with me, and we're at a point. I've got my payroll met through the end of this month, but I got to get it through the end of April and the end of maybe the end of May. So really, seriously,
it's real. It's real.
And
we want all these people to be unemployed in the next 55 days, right? Let's unemploy these people in 50 because it's settled law now that the death penalty has been removed from federal statute. I'm just teasing about that.
We got to get them paid though through those 100 days. So if you can help,
let's keep it going. Like fund this thing now to get this to get this over the line. It's never happened. Somebody wrote on the Facebook feed, "I've waited for this legislation my whole life," which is literally true. There are people who are in their 40s and 50s who have been waiting their entire life because they thought this could come. This has been one of those carrots that has been hung out in front of activists and people who care about this issue for a long time. It's different right now. There is actually representatives who've put their name onto House resolutions, onto bills, and the fact that the Senate has now moved one forward just last night. That's why we're talking about this today, because this really does matter. So Death Penalty Action is the best place you can go, or maybe you already know how to reach your representative. But most people I know, Abe, they don't know how to reach their representatives. They're not sure. The fact that you just have a button on there that they can push, they enter their zip code. Once they get their zip code, now they've got the phone numbers, mailing addresses, and email addresses to send this. There's something you can do. So if you're saying to yourself, I want to be part of this country and changing what goes on in its politics, there are few things as clear as this one, because bills come up. Now, whether this bill's going to get a hearing or not all depends on the amount of pressure that Nancy Pelosi and that Chuck Schumer feel around this issue, and how much the people in their houses feel about this. So from your house to those houses, lay this pressure on as thick and as heavy as you can.
Especially if you're in Pelosi's or Schumer's district, they need to hear from you especially. So
that's right. New York and San Francisco's, all those liberal bastions. We need you to get out there and to lean into these people. So, Abe, people know deathpenaltyaction.org. That's the website place. What's your sense of the timing of this? Just in our final minutes or so here, when do you think this can be moved forward? What do you think is going to happen? Are we talking a week, 10 days, 50 days?
Well, you might have seen me rolling my eyes. people that make these declarations of first 100 days, they're like, oh my gosh. That actually came out of Andrea Alexander, who's the social justice chair for the National Council of Churches. She's the one that said the first that I heard for the first time, we got to make it a first 100 days thing. If they want it, they can do it. So, this week they're doing police reform. Next week it could be the death penalty. They could also slide these bills into some other piece of legislation if they wanted to. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. So the timing is, we would love to see hearings start to happen in April, and then from there just move it forward so that there's time we want to get more people. If you're, there's more than 70 people signed on to the House bill, 18 as co-sponsors. The Senate bill was introduced with 18 co-sponsors. We want to get more co-sponsors. We want to get some Republican co-sponsors, and then they're going to have hearings, and then we got to pass the bill through the House and Senate Judiciary committees, and then on the floor. We're going to have to endure those, I like to call it legislative waterboarding debates, where the pro-death penalty side will come up with every reason to keep a death penalty real and imagined, and then we pass the bill. And then as soon as we get it to the president, he'll sign it because he said he would, and we know he's committed to that. So, it really depends on how hard we all work.
Yep, it's literally down to you're talking. It's down to 538 people that can make this thing. Like, it is that close, right? Those representatives will make these decisions. That's why we have a representative form of democracy, and they want them to hear from you.
This could be put on the back burner. We know that, and there are people that want Joe Biden to make a declaration, sign an executive order, no federal executions. He doesn't have to do that, and it doesn't. And there's still going to be no more federal executions. But it'd be great if he did, and we've asked him to. And we've also asked him not just, Doug, you and I were there when we declared we're going to tear down that death house. It's the death house, the federal death house, is a standalone building built exclusively for executions. There have been 16 executions in that death house, and entirely, and that's the kicker, is get a bulldozer and tear that thing down. I hope we can be there when that happens, and or at
plant a garden right there,
because it's deep into the prison grounds. But we can do this. If you dream the impossible, you can do it. And that's
I think that might be the song for your TikTok dance, Abe. Dream the impossible dream. But that impossible dream is sitting in front of us in some fresh new ways. So thanks all for being a part of the podcast. As you likely know, this is a daily effort that we do every day. We have a different conversation partner and different themes. It's Friday. Tomorrow is our Science Day. You're going to love it, with an astrophysicist and a person who talks about philosophy of science. It's a great day. On Mondays, we do a recap of what's happening in the news and how it's happening, and some timely news. On Tuesdays, it's particularly political around here in our politics chat. And on Wednesdays, it's Common Good Faith with three other pastors and myself that talk about faith for the common good in the world that we live in. So thanks for being a part of all of this. You may have heard Abe coughing. Abe is a coronavirus survivor. Abe, I'm glad you're feeling better. I hope you can also get your vaccine. And thanks to the Biden administration for being a competent government and getting the vaccine into a position where by the end of May, the adults in this country can get a vaccine, and we can move on. I'm grateful that it wasn't worse than it was for me, and prayerful for everybody that's enduring it. And Doug, I'm also so grateful. You were the last person I was with before I went home and started having symptoms. And I drove you in the car don't remind me of how scared I was.
Well, no, but the good news is, Doug, whatever it is, we were unmasked together, and you still didn't get it. So I'm grateful for that too. Thank you.
Well, you are not a spreader, Abe.
Given us today.
You are welcome. It's my honor. It's an important issue for all of us, and certainly to me. And I'm just glad to know that while you spread a lot of activism, you're not a COVID spreader. So that's very thankful.
Well, my son would argue with that, and my wife.
Did they have they contracted the virus?
Yeah, they both ended up. Isaac never had symptoms, but my wife did. But because Isaac got to keep people, the rapid tests don't even trust him. Get the PCR test. My son had 2 negative rapid tests, and the coach said, come to the event with us. And he did. And then we got his PCR test back positive. The whole wrestling team had to be quarantined for 2 weeks. I was the leading asshole in the state in my son's eyes for a while. So sorry about that. But that
well done, Abe.
That was our, yeah.
You can say that. You could say you can say asshole on this podcast.
Okay. Well, at the end of the day,
especially
yes,
when
I
you're a
spread it
super
out
spreader
in
like
my
you are. I'm just
house.
glad I dodged your bullet.
I did not kill my mom, so I'm happy about that too.
Congratulations.
Keep wearing your mask.
Yeah, wear your mask, get a vaccine, and let's move on from this. Thank you, Abe. Thanks for all your good work. Thanks to all of you for being a part of the Vote Common Good community and for being a part of the Vote Common Good podcast. If you just watch online and you're not getting our podcast, head over to votecommongood.com/podcast. You can get it there. And if you just listen, if you've never seen this whole thing, click over on one of the Facebook channels. We're on all of them. So thanks for being a part of it, and we'll see you tomorrow.